And I'm also going to run over to Patreon to see if we had any questions. I don't think we did over
Cool.
there, but I wanted to see. We'll see if we get some people to come and hang out with us here.
Have you gotten any questions about Sam Sulek's diet?
No, I haven't. But I
Okay.
read something that, or actually, Victoria told me something that Fuad had said about his diet,
Mm-hmm.
and I heard a little bit about it, and we could get into that. I guess Victoria, maybe Fuad had released a video or something because a lot of people
Yeah.
are giving him crap, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've just seen it. I was literally watching the third reaction video that I've seen to his diet.
Oh yeah.
No, well, there's one where a guy he did his diet. Patrick Teutsch is a German natural bodybuilder. He did his diet and did his training
Okay.
as best he could.
Yeah.
He didn't feel so good, and then I think there's been three, at least two, maybe a third reaction video to his diet, and I was
Huh.
just watching. So yeah, he's old school power shoving,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess what Fuad had said was like, he's disappointed in a lot of the older school guys, a lot of the more
Mm,
experienced guys that are giving him crap about what he's doing. He said, how many of you guys would give anything to go back and be at the stage he's at, where he's like just trying to figure things out for himself and make as much freaking progress as he absolutely can? It's like,
right.
we did all that same stuff that he's doing now. You know what I mean? And I think that there's
Hmm.
something pretty special about that statement in itself.
That's exactly the point where I was in this latest reaction video. It was
Huh.
that comment just came up. It was fresh in my head, which it's funny that you pulled that up. It's not even ironic. That's kind of the most one of the most important things I think to touch upon. And I like what Fuad said there, because one of the principles that I try as much as possible, sometimes lose sight of it, but I try as much as possible, even here in the podcast where I get all sciencey with shit, is to recognize that if I'm trying to help people, I need to start where they are, right? So you
Yes.
can't,
Yeah.
Sam's in this spot where he's exploring, there's reasons why he has come to this diet. Maybe he tried chicken and rice or cleaner diet and he just doesn't want to do it. Maybe this is the only way he can get the food down. There's all sorts of speculation that I've seen as to what's going on in terms of how his nutrition may be mirroring whatever PEDs he's using. And some of that speculation comes from the dermatological evaluations of his skin,
Oh.
right?
Yeah.
He's got his skin isn't great, that sort of thing. Um, so you've got guys who are old school who did that, and they're like, "Oh man, don't do it. You don't want to do it that way." Like he starts off with this giant thing of like chocolate milk.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't eat for like 2 or 3 hours in the morning. He's really hungry, and then he has this giant food bomb of chocolate milk. It's kind of he gets like 200 grams of protein in, I think, over the course of the day, and a ton of fat. And so there's lots of criticism. And the thing that just kind of occurred to me, I haven't thought this entirely through
Yeah.
in relation to each of his meals, but the what are the alternatives? I haven't heard anyone, and this I haven't read all those comments you're talking about, or what Fuad was referring to. But alternatives to that. So instead of the giant like chocolate milk, breakfast bomb, right? And I presume my guess was he's filming that day, right? So they got up and they were getting the cameras ready and doing all this kind of stuff. The video that I've seen starts like when they're out shopping, I think. So that's probably why he missed breakfast. My guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like one thing is next time, hey, no, like maybe he's like he didn't know, or maybe he slept in because he couldn't sleep very much because he was nervous about being on camera all day. It's a big day of filming or what have you. So
Yeah.
be prepared and have your regular breakfast ready the next time. Like that's the way I think to go about it. Is instead of saying you suck,
Yeah.
like your diet's stupid, you're an idiot. I know I did this. I was an idiot too. Don't be an idiot like me. It's like, okay, these are things that could be done to improve upon what you're doing, because I have done that. And while you're young and you can just toss anything down your gullet and it seems to be digestible, and maybe the PEDs are helping him because he looks great. Like, his body fat's low. He's impressive, right?
Yeah.
Hell
of a physique, especially for his age.
Yeah, he's 21. But it's not sustainable, so to speak. So what are the alternatives? And like, I'm thinking stuff like what if you want to have like chicken or rice and beef? Let's say you want to get some fat in there. You want to get beef. You can add barbecue sauce to your beef, so make it like really, really tasty. Make it minced so it's easier to get down. It's already sort of mechanically digested. And you throw some honey in your rice, right?
Ooh,
so
I never did that.
Rice is, that's honey and some salt too. Oh, makes rice taste really, really good for most people, right? And honey is, it's probably a better choice. Honey's carbohydrate. The moieties, whether it's glucose or fructose, varies depending on time of year and where you get the honey from. And
is that so? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I cover that in my book someplace. There's a really interesting study, if I recall correctly, and there's like a table with like 10 or 12 different honeys, and they list out the percentage carbohydrate from fructose and glucose, maltose, everything, and it's all over the place. Yeah. So it kind of depends, and that's the thing. It's sort of like the fat that's in canned tuna. There's a certain time of the year, when the tuna are getting ready to migrate, and their body fat increases because they need those fat calories for the migration. And I don't eat a lot of canned tuna anymore. Maybe this isn't the case, but it was for sure. You could watch for like a couple months. The canned tuna, which was normally really lean, it's like it's not lean anymore. It's not the tuna in oil. It's just the tuna. It's because the composition of the tuna changed, and you could see that it was reflected in the can. You could taste it, right?
No kidding.
So the same thing happens with honey, depending on what the bees are feeding on, and which bees and where it is in the world that the honey was harvested and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So like that's a thought, like how to get those. He wants to get like 400 grams of carbs in before his first training session, and he does it with what's the cereal? Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Okay. He's on a party of the Cereal Gains Nation, huh?
He didn't mention that. Who knows? He does it before pre-workout because he wants to get those carbs in.
Okay.
Right? And there's maybe a reason why he's wanting a lot of carbs in before and during his workout, and then he has some after. So he's wanting to keep his glucose levels high, perhaps for a certain reason. But there's a good amount of fat actually in Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Is there really?
Huh. It's pretty high,
for
fat-wise for cereal. It's not like Rice Krispies is like 0.5 grams of fat per serving.
Yeah.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch is like, maybe I'll look it up right now. It's like maybe 5 grams.
I had no idea.
Yeah, you can tell. I mean, I can tell, right?
Which is just 5 grams, but if you're eating 7 servings, it adds up. Yeah.
I don't know if it's 5. Let me see here. Looking, I can't remember exactly.
What's up, guys? Everybody who's tuning in live, thanks for being here. We're going to answer your listener questions, by the way, while Scott looks up cereal macros. If you guys want to, I see a couple questions here. If you want to comment with questions, we're going to hang out for an hour or so and take your questions and hang out with you guys this Sunday morning. Thanks for being with us. Hope you're having a good day.
It's 4 grams. So
okay,
yeah, when you're putting down a whole box. You can. The reason I can tell, the thing I do, like a Cereal Gains Nation hot tip, is a lot of times when I was doing post-workout cereal, and if my workout got set back later in the day, crisp, and I knew I wanted to get that meal in, and then the next I have another big meal, later on that night. If it were like 3 or 4 o'clock, and I got that next meal coming up in a few hours. If I ate a higher fat cereal, it would digest more slowly.
Oh, absolutely.
And I can tell, but like for me, Rice Krispies or Cocoa Pebbles, or what, like cocoa's got a little bit of fat in it, but the Fruity Pebbles, boom, that's in and out of me, lickety split.
Yeah.
I would even get reactive hypoglycemia from that sometimes. No insulin involved.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. I like 3 hours later, because I get a nice insulin spike. It's got a super high glycemic index. The fat's so low.
I wonder, Nick Weary is with us. I wonder how much cereal he's ever eaten, like in one sitting.
I don't know how many boxes it was. He's got a video. It's a giant bowl. It's 4 times the size of your head. It's a huge bowl. It's like several boxes.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's on his YouTube channel. Check it out. I think it's The Hungry Couple is the name of the YouTube channel he and Miki have.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
We still got to get together and do something with him with Dave Crossland's Daily Diet. We just haven't done that.
I know.
But yeah, so with Sam's diet, I mean, here's the thing though. What he's doing is basically like he didn't start here. You know what I mean? Like he's worked up to this point of being able to eat this volume of food, and he's doing it with the things that have worked easily. And it sounds like it's convenience as part of that, right?
Totally.
And I think that with these things, it could become overwhelming to have probably at this point thousands of people looking at him and being like, "Oh, dude, your diet's shit," and that, you know, everybody's got something negative to say, right?
Yeah,
everybody has something negative to say. There's probably jealousy involved here to some extent by some people, and you know, even if they don't even recognize it. And then there's people that just want to be angry at the world, and then there's the people that probably want to see something better for him. You know what I mean? Like you said, there's the guys that are like, "Hey, we did this. I did this. Don't do it." I think sometimes we have to figure these things out for ourselves, number one. And number two, I don't think that we can change everything at once. Like, for me at least, I can understand the concepts of what needs to be changed. And then I might be able to adopt one thing right now. I'm a slow person to change. And over time, it'll evolve. You know, maybe I'll say, hey, maybe I can do something better for meal one and still use some cereal, you know what I mean, or whatever. And then over time it evolves. But what we're seeing is not like a finely tuned diet of an experienced high level IFBB pro. We're seeing literally a 21-year-old doing everything he can in his power to gain muscle with his current set of skills. You know what I mean?
It's power shoving. The thing. Sam's a smart guy. You know, I know he's read. I know he probably knew whatever criticisms have been laid against him, that he knew they're coming.
Yeah.
Right? And I haven't watched the actual video because I've just been watching the reaction videos because I like to watch this. It's all in German, right? So that it helps me with my German. It's just interesting, and it's also kind of cool because it's the first time I've seen like these different influencers in Germany. They all have sort of their different insights, so that's kind of cool to compare. You know, it's the same video.
Yeah,
they're all saying very similar things with different insights. But what maybe they just didn't have time in the video. They didn't want to do it that way, or that's not the flavor of the video they wanted to put out this time. But it would have been cool to see how, you know, hey, I would try doing this clean, and it didn't work. You know, and I find that this works best for me. And maybe he says this in the video, and I can't be sure. Like I said, I haven't watched the original video, but I imagine he could have foreseen those criticisms and said, yeah, you know, I tried this in this way before, and it just didn't work this way, or this is just the way that I can get the food in most easily, and I find that I get bloated if I try other things, and this way the food goes in, I sleep really well, I seem to recover really well. Because when you don't address those things, then you're sort of opened up, and he's, of course, learning as he goes. He went from, I think, relatively an unknown to like now he's just a superstar in a matter of just months and weeks. Yeah. So, you know, he's learning. So I wonder why he is eating in this way, like how he's come to that. Because of course the one of the main things I've heard mentioned in this context is that all the other 21-year-olds are going to start eating that way. Start doing that, you know, and that's not going to work without his genetics and without whatever support he's got going on.
Sure.
And the other thing too, like just a consideration as an old guy, is that, you know, in a certain biochemical and pharmacological environment, you can do that. You can just, you know, pound whatever you want. But when that's no longer in place, that kind of diet is just gonna make you pretty fat, and it's going to really impact your blood lipids and insulin sensitivity and those sorts of things. It's something we know that it's not going to kill you tomorrow, but it's a kind of kill you slowly type of thing, and it's not a sustainable approach. For instance, with someone who's not continually just going for broke the entire time, and I think that's the thing. Like Sam's like, this is like in his Fuad said this, like. He's like, I want to bodybuild when he sees Sam doing this, because he did it. Fuad did it, you know, somewhat in the same way. Yeah. And I was actually there, so to speak, when Haas, which is where Hostile Nutrition comes from, that was his online screen name.
Yeah.
at least on Chad Nichols' board. I don't know if you remember or know this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He always went by that.
He went by Haas, and he had these pictures of himself in the basement. I think it was a basement locker room with the lockers that he posted. Those were his update pictures.
Yeah.
I remember when he first hit 300 pounds, right?
No kidding.
Before he got his pro card, when he posted those pictures, and he was and he trained animalistically, intuitively, went after it. So he's doing a lot of these things. And so I think what lot of people watching this don't realize is how Sam's got genetics where this is going to work for him. He's got other things in place, I presume, where this is going to work for him, and he can get away with this.
Yeah.
But it's not contextualized in a way that it's a hard thing to do. Like you say it every a million and one times, people are still going to go and imitate what you did. They're still going to copycat him,
Yeah.
But that's the thing that I think, that's why I'm using this platform to say, hey, I totally get. I remember, like, as an example, I remember when I was pushing the times that I pushed like 6,000 calories a day. He's at like I think 5,000 in this diet.
Okay.
And I was up 250, 260 at that time, so the body weight was similar, and I had to eat, I think, more calories than he is to try to move forward. And I would do like rice or noodles mixed with meat. I like to do this kind of an egg, sometimes with some whole eggs in there.
Yeah.
So sort of a mixed macro scramble, and those were delicious. I'd do like 2 or 3 of those a day.
I interrupt this broadcast to say shout out to IFBB Pro Miss Olympia Natalia Coelho, who's joining us this morning. Sorry, Scott. She deserves the interruption. That sounds like a lot of calories in that meal.
Yeah, with 1,000 calorie meals,
Yeah.
But I tried to pay attention. I wasn't doing like a lot of saturated fat. I was doing, fish oils. I was eating salmon was in some of those meals.
Yeah.
And I would do like I had these monster protein shakes that I would make that were 1,000 calories.
Yeah.
Tons of carbs, a little bit of MCT oil, not too much because otherwise your GI. But so I found a solution for doing that. And 6,000 calories in no way, shape, or form is something that your body is just begging for you to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just not. But there are other ways to go about it. So it'd be interesting to know. Maybe I'm sure. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know what's going on in the U. If everyone's doing reaction videos here in the U.S. on YouTube.
I'm sure they are. I haven't followed enough, but I'm sure they are.
Yeah. I mean, I found 3 of them. Everyone's doing it. So
yeah,
maybe he'll do a reaction video to the reaction videos. That would be really interesting.
I'd be curious to hear his perspective, and hopefully he says, hey, here's the thing is hopefully he can handle the pressure too, because it is a lot of people. I mean, he was just doing his thing before this, right? And he was growing and making progress and loving what he's doing. I hope that any type of like stir that's created around this that's negative, that he's all right with that. You know what I mean? I hope it doesn't have any kind of negative impact on anything he's doing. I say more power to him and let him just keep figuring things out. Instead of critiquing him, I'd rather just watch the evolution happen, because if he's going to keep it in his life, it's going to change. You know what I mean? And we can all say, like, I think back, Scott, I can look at even conversations we had, like your training. You did training that was absolutely ridiculous, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you look back at that now, and
total idiot.
Those are the things that we look back and we laugh about. And we're like, holy crap, I can't believe I used to do that. Just in his case, he happens to be documented in the process of that,
Right.
Versus most people show up and they want to be completely polished already, and they have the Jay Cutler diet, and I'm eating some cod for this meal and, 2 cups of rice and everything's measured out. And you said there's a concern that more bodybuilders, younger guys, may be influenced by this. I think that influence could even be a good thing at this stage, because everything is so micromanaged and so perfect. I know people that are basically like paralyzed and feel like they don't know what to do, versus on the opposite end, you've got a guy like Sam who's just trusting his gut. He's figuring it out as he trudges through, right? And he's learning in the process. And if he sticks with it, he'll probably come to a lot of the same conclusions that the older guys have today, and he'll look back and he'll laugh at himself. So that'd be my thought on it, at least.
The first thing you mentioned, like whether he's a solid cat. I don't think there's any. I can't imagine that he's going to somehow crumble from the pressure. He doesn't seem like he's reactive. I mean, Fu had, I'm not sure how he found him or how he came in contact with him, but he picked a solid cat. He's a good dude. He picked him because he's a good influencer and that he's relatable in the way he comes across. And he is exactly what you said, at least what I've seen in the reaction videos to his video. You know, he's not like, I got to measure everything to the exact gram. Right. He's not overly OCD about these things. And some people will take that on and say, well, I don't have to measure anything. Right. So
of course we're extreme, you know,
the problem is, and it's kind of always sort of an issue, I think, even if you contextualize, you can only do so much. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Okay.
So if he contextualizes and say, you know, this is a diet that works for me, it's what I've come to because, you know, when I tried other ways, I just couldn't get the food in, or I was just so bloated, I couldn't train. I didn't feel good when I was training, whatever reasons he came to. Even if you say that, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, I can't count how many you watch, like all the Trenbolone. This is what Trenbolone does. And people will say, Trenbolone is severely toxic. It does this, that, and the other. You shouldn't use it unless you're highly advanced and you've used you come to all the other measures possible, blah, blah, blah. And still people go and they just reuse Trenbolone.
Of course so they do.
Yeah. And that's for me always where it's sort of an ethical dance to do as to what you mention. Because, and this is, I just heard another interview with another German influencer is he talks a good bit about drugs.
Okay.
And, you know, the concern is, you're providing information, precautionary information, so that people have that, but you're also making them aware of something that maybe they wouldn't be aware of anyway, and it will be mistaken. So you've got this side of the coin that says, you know, you're mentioning this stuff, you're talking about how you used it, and they're going to want to just do what you did. Yeah. Even though you say I was an idiot for using it, they're still going to do it. So if you just shut up and say nothing, right, then they're less informed. And the thing is, we don't know, because there's going to be a distribution, just like pretty much everything human. Some people are going to say, oh, I'm so glad he kept me from making a big mistake because I was just about to pull the gun on something stupid. I'm glad I didn't do that. And then there are other people who are thinking, oh shit, well, he went ahead and did it. You know, I'll find out for myself, even though, and I wouldn't have done it had I not seen the video, and everything in between. So
I just had a conversation with a guy yesterday who inquired about coaching, and he said, hey, by the way, can you talk about, do a show about using blood pressure medications, statins, and some other stuff with your cycles? And I wrote back to him and I said, it's kind of it's an interesting place we're in, because, you know, I can say coaching for 14 years, I've found that in most cases we can control a lot of side effects through finesse and using the least to get using the least we can to get the most powerful experience or result that we are looking for, and then trying to really focus and hone in on the nutrition and training to really do that heavy lifting. And that with that combination, we've been able to mitigate a lot of the side effects that would require some of the stronger pharmaceutical ancillaries that are being used today. Whereas, and so I said to him, so I'm careful with how much I talk about the importance of using a statin on cycle, because I'm finding now that there are younger guys who don't have any experience. So, you know, a lot of times I think with side effects, a lot of them, I mean, maybe blood pressure, you can see instantly, but, you know, do you have issues with your cholesterol? I think that that's something that generally is going to show itself and develop over a course of time. It's not going to be like, you know, you're 6 weeks into your first cycle and all of a sudden your life is altered. Cholesterol has changed and there's no going back, you know?
Right.
But if somebody were to say down the road need a medication like that, we will become aware of it. And for somebody like that, I think that would be an awesome plan to give them a medication that they need. But, you know, in 14 years of coaching, it's been very rare that I've actually seen that need. given that we use the techniques that I mentioned, focusing in on the training, nutrition, using finesse in the cycle, whereas I'm seeing younger guys now who don't have that experience, and they're just prophylactically using all of these powerful pharmaceuticals without even knowing if they need them or not. And it's a lot of it. I blame a couple things. I blame a lot of I'm going to use the word losses that we've had. I'm trying to be YouTube friendly here. Losses that we've had, since, it's been like since 2020 or so. You can make any correlations you want there, but we've had a great deal of losses, and I think that our community is afraid, and they're looking for a safer way. So I get that, and I understand that fear. But then also I blame my people, YouTubers, social media people, content creators, who are, in some of these guys, they're looking for a better way themselves. And so they're sharing their experimentation. Like, I think Steve is one of those guys, that Steve is genuinely trying to figure out something new. And then there's also the people that are just trying to get more clicks. So they're trying to talk about something that's new and different that nobody else has ever talked about before, so they can put their name on it. I think that there's that as well. But the end result is, now when we talk about a cycle, instantaneously, it's like a melee of these additional pharmaceuticals that people almost feel that they're necessary to take in order to run what otherwise hasn't really been a problem for most people over the long term,
Yeah. And instead of first lining, trying to figure out, okay, maybe I'm using too much of X, Y, or Z.
Right.
And that's why I'm having, or maybe that's not the best choice for me. Maybe another choice would have a lesser impact on my blood pressure or on my blood lipids. The first line of attack is often to throw another drug in there.
Right.
And it kind of course is very like with so many things with the person, but I think a lot of times too, it's very infrequent. I'm trying to think of the last time I actually heard this. I mean, there are examples of some IFBB pros I've mentioned before on the show and other podcasts who kind of like came close to maxing out their development as naturals, and then they took the drug step. But that sequence of events where before you've really nailed down a nutritional approach that seems to work for you, or different approaches that seem to work for you, and training, et cetera, the drugs come into the mix. And of course that covers up, your ability to recognize how those other things should be manipulated, because now you've got the quote unquote crutch, you're going to make progress. Right. And that also becomes part of the way in which you view your toolkit. Right. So if you're used to thinking, okay, because your blood pressure can go high when you're just packing in the food, and you can start holding water just from packing in the food.
Absolutely.
That can certainly happen. Right. So you may realize, okay, I got to watch out. I got to increase my water. I got to reduce my sodium. Maybe change some of these foods. Stop eating so late at night. Whatever it might be, there's various things you can do. And then you're like, how to use that wrench and that screwdriver and that drill really, really well. And then when you bring a hacksaw in there with like a drug, which is just like cuts through everything, right? And you got all these, you got your toolbox, which are all manual tools where you have to kind of do the wrenching yourself. That's kind of what, in a way, I'm developing another metaphor here, but that's sort of what natural bodybuilding and bodybuilding without the use of PEDs involves. Like, you have to, it's a little more work, and it's a little more refined. And then when you throw in PEDs, many people, especially if they respond really well, it's like, okay, now I've just got like a circular saw, or, a hacksaw, or a chainsaw, or, a circular saw, whatever it is. And boom, you can just cut through shit easy.
Right.
And then you start to think, well, instead of taking this screw and just loosening a little bit or tightening a little bit with the screwdriver, just take a hammer and slam the thing in, get it out of the way. It's like, no, it should be screwed in. It's a screw. It's not a nail.
Finesse.
Finesse it. So then you just start looking to, those are the easier things. You just plug them in and they do the work. You just guide the tool with the dosage, let's say, as opposed to you have to actually put in a lot more work with those other tools that are the training, the nutrition, and all the recovery modalities that require a little more insight, knowledge, and particularity in how you apply those. So,
Insight into your body and figuring out
mhm,
what it would take to continue making the progress you're trying to make. That's where I think when we say insight, that's it, is like more time figuring it out. There's
mhm,
a lot of things I wish I figured out sooner, Scott, that I did
yeah,
shortcut, and then I came back around much later and I learned them anyway, but I could
yeah,
have made better progress had I learned those things first. And I'm
yeah,
grateful that we have this channel, and I'm grateful to be able to coach, because it allows me to then help people figure those tools out in a
mhm,
more proper order, or
yeah.
a more advantageous order, I guess.
Pay it forward, right?
Yeah.
Pay it forward. I mean, I think back on clients that I've worked with, especially when I was like doing regular coaching, week by week coaching, and I remember like even being astounded, like when it first started happening. And I know you've talked about this with your clients too. It's like, okay, everything, we're moving in the right direction. We're on target to be ready, showtime or what have you, if we're in a diet, and don't change anything. Just let it go. And the next week, don't change anything. And the next week, don't change anything. And you can go 5 or 6 weeks without changing anything, right? Because you're just patient and you know what's kind of working, and like you don't need to make any adjustments. You're going in the right direction. Your trajectory is
Right.
perfect. But when the tools of your trade are powerful pharmaceuticals, and sometimes you think, oh shit, I gotta start using this drug before I even have high blood pressure, for instance. And some drugs, people talk about metformin, for instance, being something that's generally considered pretty healthy. But I think Ken had this experience. And I talked about a good friend of mine who's a very, very high level female bodybuilder, and very, very, very scientifically astute, upper echelon scientist. And she was taking large doses of metformin, like over 2,000 milligrams a day.
Yeah.
And she just removed it, and she started growing like a weed. She
Yep.
said she felt like she was on a cycle, right?
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes just throwing those things in there might be having ill-wanted effects.
I did the same thing
Very
with
possible.
Arimidex. The first
Okay,
time I
yeah,
used Arimidex, I overused it, and I know I talked about it
milligram
on a show
or something.
recently. I can't remember what it was, but I
Yeah,
remember first cycle, fantastic progress. Second, fantastic. Third, fantastic. I think I had Novadex on hand. Fourth, Arimidex, and it was like, why didn't I grow the way I wanted? I definitely got stronger,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
didn't make the nearly, even remotely the progress I had previously. And then it
Hmm.
started making sense to me that
Right.
maybe I did that
Yeah,
a little overboard. We got a bunch of questions here, man.
yeah. I see it. It's lighting up over there.
It is. There was one here I wanted to pull up, because it allows us to talk about progressive overload. Um,
Okay.
so it says, "Hi Scott, what comes to mind when you think about DC training? Um, what about it is so great of a program?"
Before you release, look at his avatar. Did he just choose that based on what we're talking about? It's all a bunch of tools. Like what the hell? um, Meticulous attention to progressive overload, meticulous attention to progress, and form. The thought that I have is that I like to believe, at least to some degree, that form follows function, that the hypertrophic adaptation comes because we're driving. So that's the form that comes because we're driving function, performance in some way, shape, or form. So something about the tension that's produced, the if we want to go through like the old school model of tension, metabolic stress, blah blah blah. And those are cans of worms we shouldn't probably open, because we can talk forever about each of those. There's some issues, but the idea that you're progressively overloading and demanding of the system and of the skeletal muscle that its performance is improved. DC training, and this is how I've talked about DC training on now actually 2 podcasts in German like the last month.
Okay.
Funny enough, yeah. So people if they speak German, they can go back and check those out. Um, Bildungselite, Bildungselite podcast, and Mark Drossel's podcast. So you can check that out. But DC training, I came to DC training. I was basically doing, aside from the stretches and the cluster sets, essentially the DC training split when I found DC training. I'd come to that over the course of many years myself. And because it's and people who don't have like a formal sports science training background, didn't know or don't know that like Dante didn't invent progressive overload. He may have come up with it to some degree on his own. He may not have learned that in a textbook or what have you, but
Sure.
that's the main training principle that really applies to all sports training, is some form of progressive overload. And Dante just, he whittled it down to just like, and it's funny, maybe this is why it felt like it made sense to mention Sam Sulek's diet, because he's kind of winging it to some degree.
Yeah.
And that works. Like most pro bodybuilders just kind of wing it. They have a training split, but they kind of wing it to some degree. They're not logbooking, I guess is the more direct way to say that. And Dante worked, and I got a question actually about DC training in my messages, my DMs on Instagram. I've been going back and forth with a German guy. Liebe Grüße, wenn du zuhörst. And Dante focuses on progressive overload with the logbook in a way that most people just don't want to do. They just don't want to just nail it down in that way. Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. It's just paying attention very meticulously that you're moving forward in the right direction. And same thing with the food. The food has to be progressively overload. And eventually, if you make yourself into a monster that is moving heavy loads in the gym with good bodybuilding form and bodybuilding repetition range, et cetera, then you're going to be the monster that your genetics will allow by reaching that level of gym performance, gym bodybuilding performance. So that's what comes to mind with DC training. Is it's basically, it's irrefutable. It's almost irrefutable to me. Like, some people are just kind of non-responders. Most people are not complete non-responders. They just maybe don't adapt strength-wise, but maybe hypertrophy. In the example, you might have people who adapt strength-wise and no hypertrophy. That's not the greatest thing, but at least you'll know, right? If you turn yourself into someone who's, squatting 500 pounds for reps and incline pressing, 275, 315 for reps, and you've got just a massive, and you still didn't become a giant, huge monster. Well, what else are you going to do, right? Yeah. At least you got to where you're really strong, and now you can try a higher volume approach, which may very well work. We know this. But to some degree, simply, and this is the thing that we can't really look at in terms of the scientific literature, is that's something that happens over the course of years. There are some training logs that still exist over Intense Muscle where you see people doing what Jordan now is renowned for doing, is microloading. Yeah. And you look, I remember seeing like posts and journals and Dante posted them. Here's one of my clients, and I just clipped out what he sent me, because he sent me his training log. That's what what I always do with the DC training. What I do with my clients too, with fortitude training to some degree. Tell me what's happening with your performance in these lifts. And with DC training, you get everything. Just send me your whole training log, week by week. I want to know everything you did, this time and the previous time. So what was your last performance and the next performance? And Dante would post like week by week training performance, like every 3 weeks when you're coming back to those core exercises over the course of years. And it's like 210 for 8, 210 for 10, 210 for 12, then 220 or 225 for 8, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the weight would just keep on inching forward week after week, sometimes with some stalls. And then you pick it up 3 or 4 months later after you switch another exercise out, and then that one stalls. You just keep inching forward over the course of many, many years. And maybe I'm not connected, and the bodybuilding boards allowed you to connect more on a one-to-one basis with people, because you could follow them more easily. Now you have the algorithms just send you whatever the hell they want to send you.
Right, you have to go out of your way to follow.
You really do. Yeah. Ring the bell on YouTube, and you kind of get notifications, but you're not seeing training logs like that.
Speaking of which, guys, if you aren't subscribed, then let me encourage you to subscribe, hit the bell. You probably are if you're here, by the way, but I should say it anyway. Probably. We appreciate having you guys here, and thanks for your comments. We're going to keep covering your questions. Sorry, go ahead.
So that you don't see people doing that, and that's a long-term kind of dedicated approach. And you have to have the right mindset. There has to be some immediate gratification in training that way. You have to enjoy being an idiot, being an animal, just going to town. So you like the struggle. Yeah. You like the grind to some degree. But if you tell someone, it's like, okay, Can you imagine here's how to lose a client, right? At least with like, your average lifestyle clients. Like, okay, I'm going to be able to make you look like this picture. You brought in a picture of some model you want to look like, something reasonable. So we're not going to put you on a bunch of gear.
Yeah.
But it's going to take 3 years. And what we're going to do is every time you come in, every work set is going to be absolutely excruciating, and it's going to push you beyond anything you've ever experienced effort-wise in your entire life. And you're going to up that ante every time you come into the gym with every non-warm-up set that we do.
Yeah.
They'll be like, okay, I'll find the next guy. I'm not doing this. People don't want to do that. And I I totally understand them. It's like, imagine you come in like, you're signing. It's like, it feels like masochism.
Yeah.
And I think probably technically it could be considered that. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say for sure, but it's a masochistic approach to some degree, but it's one that logically speaking, you just can't deny to some degree is going to have to be successful.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to have to gain the weight to gain that strength. You're going to have to learn how to do those exercises. As long as you're not just becoming super sloppy, something has to happen when you become magnificently strong.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, benching 185 to benching 205. I'm talking people who over the course of 5 years go from 185 to 275 or 295.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to show. You're going to see that. But if you keep on bouncing from program to program and, zigzagging around and no pun intended with zigzagging and fortitude training, but bouncing all over the place in terms of your approach, trying high volume, what have you, whatever the next influencer suggests is the way to go, then, you're gonna miss out on that. And, that's the thing. Like, Dave and I was doing DC training when I first started training with Dave, and then I switched to his program, which was way too much for me. I told that story. And I said, let's give DC training a try. And that's when Dave talked to Dante, and Dante led him through, and I trained alongside the first 2 or 3 years, I think, at least that long. And we stuck with DC training based pretty much exclusively for 8 years. 8 years.
Yeah. I get people who ask me like, hey, how often should I change my split? And I think about people like you and Dave. I think about a lot of people I've known that there may be variation within it, but for the most part, it's like the split has pretty much stayed the same for really long times in a lot of cases with a lot of successful people I know.
Mm-hmm. And back to what you're saying with the supplements, I'm going to tie this together because it was really, so when you get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm petering out on this lift, or, this one, it doesn't seem like it's working. Well, then you take a training cruise, you change your diet, you change your exercise. If you're doing deadlifts, rack deads, you drop it down to a little bit deeper. You pull the weight back, so you got a little bit longer pull. You can't pull as much, or you add bands, or you add chains, or you add some variety in there, and you just figure out a way to inch forward, because at the top, the mountain is there, right?
Yeah.
This is here's another nice analogy. Just imagine this. It's like people start climbing up that mountain like that. That's the golden chalice. It's right there. You just got to get to the top of the mountain, and that's when you're benching a massive amount of weight, bench, squat, deadlift. Your big three are big, and all your other bodybuilding exercises are strong as shit. Right.
Yeah. When you reach the point that everybody in the gym stops when you do your top set.
Right. Exactly. People walk. It's like, okay, this is guy's going to town. But what happens? You start to go up that hill, and then your progress stops, right? And that's when you're like, I'm not a rock climber. But imagine a rock climber. It's like, okay, I'm gonna have to find a handhold or make one, chisel one in, and I'm gonna have to keep going because it's just gonna get steeper, and it's not gonna get any easier. It's not like, oh, now I'm just cruising up this thing. It's like it gets harder the further you go. The law of diminishing returns applies. So what happens with many folks is all they you can see it. The goal's at the top of the mountain, but instead what they do is like, screw it, and they look for a side path, and they go down another, and they kind of slide back, and then they try to go up another way. There's got to be an easier way. There's got to be an easier way, And then maybe they add PEDs in there too soon, perhaps, and of course that skyrockets you way up there.
Sure,
right? That's like you got a jetpack on it, and it brings you up closer to the top. But you're not actually, this is actually kind of an interesting, kind of cool analogy the more I think about it, but you're not actually doing some of the climbing. You're not actually able to hold yourself on that mountain because your height, your elevation is because of that jetpack. It's because of the PEDs.
Yeah.
And if you gotten there relying upon that, when that thing cuts out, when the PEDs come out, you come falling right back down, and maybe even below where you once were. Because you didn't learn how to climb on your own with nutrition and supplementation, lifestyle change, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So what do? You get another jetpack, right? And you stay on the jetpack, and maybe you want to jetpack the entire time, but at some point you're missing out. You're missing out on the learning process that comes from figuring out when you're in those difficult spots. Like, I got to figure out how to keep coming forward. If I just keep on moving it up on my own. And then maybe you add the jetpack might be in there when you're like, you've been at the halfway, 3/4 of the way up. It's like, okay, I decided I'm going to make this. I've educated myself. I'm going to make this leap. I'm going to add a little jet fuel to my setup. But then you come down from that higher spot. You've got that experience of having climbed that high. So when you come off, you still enjoy the training. You still find it interesting to try to figure out how to manipulate your training and your diet and those sorts of things. You've got that, and that's not going to go away. That's sort of a base, so to speak, as it's spoken about. You got a good training base. That's
a good analogy. All right, we got to move a little bit quicker. Yeah. We got to move a little bit quicker because we've got about 30 questions piled up. And Nick Weary said, for anybody who's been here long term, a lot of times with live streams, we have people who come and go. So they may have just been popping in the middle of that. We were talking about the virtues of DC training. And Nick Weary said that his largest bowl of cereal was a 13-pound bowl of Lucky Charms, including milk. I kind of had a follow-up one to that last question regarding DC training from Still Dreamin' 02. Says, if you change tempo versus load, such as slowing down the negative, and you fail with less reps than if you had a faster tempo, is that also considered progressive overload by changing the time under tension?
So leave that there if you could, because there's pieces I want to pull out of that. So at its root, progressive overload creates a stimulus because it's novel, right? You've asked something of the system. This is kind of the one side of progressive overload. You've asked something of the system that it's never before achieved. You've gotten more reps. So it's that novelty of stimulus which creates a novel adaptation, assuming you're supporting it recovery-wise. So if you change the way you execute an exercise, which is what he's talking about there, slow the negative and you fail with less reps, you're not logbooking a progressive overload because you don't have anything to compare it with. It's the first time you did the exercise that way, let's say.
Yep.
And it's you can't really call it progression because you haven't progressed from anywhere. That's a brand new starting point. But it can be a novel stimulus, and you can kind of see that it is because taking the deadlift example, or when you do something like that, if you've been training with a certain tempo and all of a sudden you change it up and you keep volume, number of sets, everything pretty much the same as you can, but now you change time under tempo, you change the relative time spent in that negative, you're going to get sore.
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be a soreness, and that's representative of the stimulus that you put forth. Soreness is not just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So whether you could call that progressive overload, it's not progressive overload probably in a measurable fashion in the way we typically do on the progression in terms of performance side of things. What happens, what would in order to call that, like what I would feel more comfortable calling that progressive overload is what happens on the other side of progressive overload. So progressive overload manifests in the logbook as progression in terms of your reps and weight, right? And in order to support that, so that continue, you have to have recovery. So ideally, that progression is reflecting muscle mass for bodybuilders, not some neurological adaptation, learning how to do the exercise, what have you. Yeah. So if let's say you stalled with that old tempo, and maybe let's just make it sort of simpler to follow. Maybe you're just dropping the weight. You're completely neglecting the negative. You're just bouncing the weight up, and you said, okay, I'm going to go nice and slow here. Control mind-muscle connection on the target muscle. It's a common thing I've noticed, like in pressing movements, that a lot of times people will press really well with the chest, and then when they come down, the chest becomes unactivated. They deactivate it relatively. Yeah. So maybe this is something that happens, so that hidden side of the coin, the downside of the coin of progressive overload, where the recovery and adaptation is happening to allow you to then have The obvious side of progressive load manifest, where you get more reps, would be something that would happen after you apply that tempo change over the course of 2 or 3 months. Mm-hmm. Then you see, I changed my tempo or whatever aspect of my execution. And now I'm seeing that progressive overload is actually occurring because I'm seeing it manifest in my pecs. They're growing. And, of course, I went from doing 10 reps with this lower tempo to 12 reps to more weight, et cetera, et cetera. So you see it also, and that you kept the tempo the same. And there's actually, this is a Dante invention, and I sort of put a twist on it that's really, really, really fun. He said just kind of count these things out, and I said let's really nail this down. If someone is having trouble getting their back to grow from, let's say, rack deads or just back thickness, there's a Widowmaker that we would do during DC training, and this is just, I remember the first time I did this, and I did it. I've done it many times. Dave used to hate these because they're just fucking brutal. So it's basically a rack dead, like mid-shin rack dead, on a 5-second count. So you would pull up in 1 second and then do a 4-second negative, but with a metronome.
Oh,
so do it with a metronome.
Yeah.
So you go up, deep, 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 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, up, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the whole time, you're keeping your back arched, your elbows are back, you're just contracting the shit out of your lats, and it's a lat wrecker. And you literally have to, let's say you're pulling 495 on rack deads for 8 or whatever, you're going to have to drop down to like 2 1/4. You might get like 15 reps.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely, you have to watch your low back, don't your low back around. And one of the times I did this, did it with his name's James Allen. I'm sure he's not watching, but we trained a little bit together back in Arizona. Real good bodybuilder back in the day. And he messaged me the night of. He's like, "Shit, man, my lats are wrecked." And when he's wiping his butt, he can't wipe my butt because my lats are cramping up. And I was having the same thing happen. You're reaching back like that, and the lats were just cramping like a mofo. So that's an example of what he's talking about. And it was just complete, utter lat annihilation. And it was awesome.
Man.
Much less weight. Yeah, and total focus on the lats the entire time. You have to keep your low back, in a good, safe place. Sometimes the low back will be even if the low back is like, okay, I can't get any more of these because my low back's starting to bend. By the time you've done all those and you've really contracted the lats,
yeah,
it's just awesome. And the thing is that it's relatively safe too, because the weight has to be so light to do that. So that's a good example of what he's talking about that I actually employed, and it worked phenomenally.
Yeah, when I trained chest with the dumbbell incline press that we used to talk about all the time, I did a ton of progression, in my opinion, without moving a ton up in weight. I mean, one of the first things I did was just try to clean my technique up. And I felt to myself, okay, so if I'm able to get the 110-pound dumbbells up for 10 reps, and now I'm getting them with better technique, so even better range of motion was the first step. I had to dial it back to really light weights, and that was during the beginning of the shutdowns. And I perfected my technique, being able to bring the dumbbell all the way down, being able to activate the pec, and as I drove up, then like kind of build momentum almost to as the shoulders and triceps got involved. But then at the top, not really pause, but not even jam it up either, but just kind of like take off the tension, kind of coast into the top, and then really control that negative down.
Heck.
That was my, feeling it in the pec all the way down. That was my first step. Then the next step was recording my sets. And initially I tried to record sets for Instagram because I wanted to show everybody what I was doing. But what I started seeing was, hey, you know what? I really had control in that first 5-6 reps, but that last, 4 reps wasn't as controlled. So why don't I try to do better at that? And that's where I think the progression really started for me within technique, without even moving in weight, because then I could see like, okay, I actually got 7 reps with what I would consider to be the control that I want to see. And then the last 3, I could see it starting to slip. And then as I got further up, I could say, okay, now I'm going to try to get 8 reps with that control. And if I can, I'll get all 10, right? But maybe I got 8 reps with that perfect control. And the last 2 were not bad, by just a layman's eye if somebody was to watch it. But I was holding myself to like a really high standard. And then I reached a point where I was able to complete, 10 reps at that speed that I wanted. But I wasn't able to maintain that. Like I had to deload. There'd be periods where it's like I had to back it off, and then maybe I was training with the 90s and I'd build back up, the next time the hundreds, the next time back to the 110s, and do that for a couple weeks and get a couple more reps. Eventually, I moved up over a 2-year period of time to the 125s using this technique. And so I'm literally, I feel like I used progressive overload for 2 years on that movement, only having increased by 15 pounds in that entire window. Now, I'll tell you that Skip is not a fan of progressive overload. And when I say that he's not a fan of progressive overload, he's not a fan of the concept that most people believe progressive overload to be, meaning that we have to add more weight each time. That each time there has to be more weight or more reps. And to him, that's not the focus. The focus is, getting more out of it, getting that novel stimulus, I think. But for me, I don't think you can disagree that with what I'm doing, this is still progression, and I think that he'd be more attuned to that. But what I'm talking about, though, it's harder to explain. Like you can't, you know what I mean? It's a lot easier to say, hey, just put 2 more pounds on the bar. You know what I'm saying? And I think most of the time we end up sacrificing our technique. So I'm with this guy. I like where he went with that. And I would say now that he has that slower technique within reason, I'm not saying do a 10-second negative. You know what I mean?
Right.
But get that control down and now begin to build from there. And honestly, I think you can use progressive overload without nearly the likelihood of getting hurt compared to what most people see progressive overload as being.
Yeah. So I have about 1,000,001 thoughts to that. I like that, what you just said, Scott. So a little science to the mind-muscle connection. Like several of the studies, I think there's 3 now that have looked at EMG and the triceps and the delts and the pecs during pressing movements. Okay. And the bottom line that comes out of those is that when you try to move too quickly, you tell them use your pecs or use your triceps on a pressing movement, and they can do that. But if they try to move too quickly, they can't do it as well. It's probably a coordination issue, and more rapid movements require greater levels of activation. Yeah. And then when they get above about 80% of a 1 rep max, they can't do that. And the thing is that a 1 rep max is a 1 rep max where you're using all the muscle mass that's there. So then if you try to press just with your pecs and not with your delts and triceps, you're just not going to be as strong. You're not going to get as many reps. So going slower and going lighter makes sense. Your 1 rep max or your 10 rep max with using everything available is going to be greater than when you're using it when their chest is the weak link and you've got a good mind-muscle connection there. Sure. And the thing that just popped in my head, when I was imagining you going through your training progression, is if you look at how John Meadows would train, really good mind-muscle connection, very focused on that. And sometimes what you wouldn't see so much with John is like all these like crazy grinder reps. And so people talk about different types of failure, and like when you measure failure in a training study, it's just like you can't get anything more. Okay. But in the field, right, down in the trenches, if you're trying to have a good mind-muscle connection, if you go to true muscular failure, let's say you've got a good mind-muscle connection, just like you said, for the first 7 or 8 reps, right? It might be that keeping that mind-muscle connection where you're focused on the pec means you're going to get 1 more rep, but you could get 3 more reps, right? Well, then you've lost the mind-muscle connection. And this is sort of a gray zone. This is the sort of the no man's land to some degree. Some people, and this can take, I think, years and years to develop. Some people can execute an exercise, and this is where finding the right exercise is important too. One that just requires a certain neuromuscular activation strategy that makes the target muscle group the weak link. But some people can train, and they can train truly to failure with that mind-muscle connection, and then still have reps or what would be completed repetitions from start to finish, but are no longer with a mind muscle connection on the target muscle. And those are really, in a sense, beyond failure.
Yeah. Okay.
To keep the main muscle that you're targeting as the prime mover per se, truly the prime mover, and go to failure, you can do that. And then you can have something left over. And that's one of the things with back to DC training, which kind of brought us to this topic, is one of the things that happens there, and this is where people need to be careful with training that way, because especially when you get really strong. And Fuad mentioned this actually in that video with Sam Sulek, is that you're always vacillating, like you're in that zone where you're trying to get more reps from the logbook, and you're also trying to avoid a form breakdown. And the form breakdown could be like you're squatting and now you're using more low back. You're able to get the weight from top to bottom to top, but you're doing that without you're getting any more on your legs. So you're basically doing sort of forced reps using your back now to move the weight, right? Yeah. And the thing that you got to do is what you did, and this is what happened over the course of like those 8 years of DC training, is, and Dante would suggest this too, and it's a great idea, is every once in a while when you're starting to cut your range of motion a little short, what have you, you're starting to perform more and more reps at the end of the set that don't have that true mind muscle connection, and your strength is becoming exaggerated because your execution, your activation pattern, your use of the target muscle is now not the only thing that's really driving the weight up and down. You're doing the exercises more like a power lifter would. You're just trying to use everything you possibly can to get the weight from X to Z or Y to Z, right? So you just pull it all back. You go back to ground zero. You reset your weights. Maybe change a variation, like do switch to a Smith squat instead of maybe that's sacrilegious. Some people switch to a Smith squat and go down and control your tempo. Make sure you're training for your legs, et cetera, and you start over again. So there's this no man's land where people with the naturally good mind muscle connection can train with progressive overload, and they can have grinder reps because they're able to maintain that under maximal effort levels, essentially, without getting sloppy. You get overexcited, and I am so guilty of this. I get so ramped up and amped up when I start sets off with really, really rapid reps because I'm just ready to go to town. It's like you just release the beast into the Coliseum. I'm ready to just tear everybody up, and then my sets would get sloppy,
Yeah.
And you gotta pull yourself back. That's the right mentality to have to some degree, but it's one that can be dangerous, and you have to be aware that you're doing that at the end of your set. So it does create a more, let's say you've got a perfect situation where as you come to the end of your set, and you really could get 1 or 2 reps with the target muscle activated in the same relative proportion to the other muscles. But what you do is then you give yourself some assistance, not by swinging or what have you. You just start to involve the triceps more so. But at the same time, you're actually getting maximal activation of the chest. You get just enough assistance from the triceps to make each of those max effort repetitions from the perspective of the chest for the last 3 or 4 that you wouldn't otherwise gotten.
Yeah.
That's a super ideal situation that I don't think, you need like a decade of training before you're even doing that kind of thing. And you're even aware of it. And it goes back to the Sam. So you gotta make those mistakes. You have to learn, just like how kids learn. I'm stealing this from Manfred Spitzer, but how do kids learn how to walk? From fall to fall, right?
Yeah.
You gotta fall down, and then get back up and keep on learning. So yeah, that's a brilliant idea. You can just change the tempo with things, and try a metronome. You might annoy people in the gym with the beep beep beep, but I think you can
probably do I was gonna say on your phone,
headset.
put it in your put it in your earbuds.
You don't have the music going at the same time, but we had to turn the music off anyway for that. But if anyone does those rack deads, let us know back. I would love to hear if they tried those, because those are just killer. They're just a total monster.
All right, let's see if we can burn through a few of these. We got, a ton of gear stuff as usual. We'll see how we can answer these. 4 weeks into a 250 test with 20 VAR per day cycle, 15 pounds of water, while only raising my maintenance by 300 to 500 calories. Will this slow down and balance out, or should I cut calories?
that was the topic you brought up. You want to answer that one, Scott? You're talking about, he's got water retention, so he's worrying about. I'm guessing he's got like cankles developing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What
So
would
he's
you
saying
do?
he's 15 pounds up, right?
That's a lot. That's not very much. He's used
for 20 VAR and 250. So the 250 test is what's doing that, right?
I would presume he's getting aromatization with that.
I wonder what his quality of food is like. Like, I wonder what his sodium intake is like. And I wonder what his water intake is like. I know a lot of people that maybe aren't super experienced and they start working with me. They aren't drinking enough fluids. And I know in your book, Scott, it says that you need at least 1 gallon of water for just normal function of the human body, right? Is that correct? Something like that?
Depends on how big you are. Yeah.
Okay.
Your body will adapt. That's a good starting point for your average size male for sure.
Okay. So I would make sure you're getting at least a gallon, And I would look at some of your sources. We were talking about Sam, and man, I think about some of the meals that I ate when I was just trying to figure it out. And I honestly went to the grocery store and I bought like some Stouffer's microwavable meals. And I just literally had like, okay, so this one's 25 grams of protein, and I'll have that and a protein scoop of protein.
9,000 milligrams of sodium.
Yeah. I'll have this and a scoop of protein. That'll be my meal 4. Meal 3, I'll do 12 hard-boiled egg whites. Meal 2, just like all stuff, just kind of weird, complete mix of foods.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a lot of good control over that. And I'll tell you what, man, just by taking somebody, even if they're eating a lot of food, and a lot of times when they start working with me and we get onto a good clean diet, the food may go up and their weight drops. They may, like, I could see a guy like this, maybe his weight would drop 8 pounds in 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Just by, that would be my starting place before I even could you get labs and see where your estrogen was? I suppose you could get more critical like that, but if he's not having any kind of weird sensitivities and his idea is to grow muscle, my first thought would be to look at the nutrition and look at the water intake.
Yeah, up the water and try to don't eliminate, but minimize extraneous sources of sodium, like high sodium food sources. The other thing that occurred to me is that makes me wonder if maybe just possibly he got Dianabol instead of Anavar.
20 milligrams of VAR or D-ball would definitely do a lot more to you than the VAR, right?
So if he's got any contest experience, do what he may have had to do like post contest when you start to have water retention, from extra food or what have you. Maybe start doing some cardio, sweat a little bit, increase his water turnover, and sort of stimulate that. But yeah, that's exactly kind of what I was thinking. But that's a lot of water. Like the thing is he's asking, he's like, is this going to go away? Because he's probably uncomfortable.
I don't think it's going to get a ton worse. You know what I mean? Like if he's gained 15 pounds. Right. If it does, man, you better rethink things for sure. But I do think though, in that first, I think he said he was 4 weeks in. So I would expect you to see that initial water increase to happen within that first 3 weeks or so. And I wouldn't expect it to double by week 6. You know what I'm saying? Yeah,
it'll taper off. But 15 is a lot. I don't know how big he is, but
it
can't be that big. That's a pretty small stack. Imagine he's not a big advanced guy. And that's maybe his first time in.
And what about body fat levels? I think, more body fat you have, I think the more water we can hold. There's that too.
Yeah. He can also get a urinalysis strips. They're not the greatest, but like just to see if he's got foamy urine, he's got any protein in his urine. That's just a nice thing to, if he's worried about blood pressure. Maybe he's a big guy who's got a good amount of body fat. I'm not throwing anything at him, saying he's a fat guy, but there may be some people listening, and maybe he's obviously he's not trying to he's up his calories, but maybe he's got a lot of body fat, and maybe he does have high blood pressure. Urinalysis strips are pretty easy to purchase. They're cheap.
Any thoughts on this one from Mike? He says, morning, Scott's question. In some people, can growth inhibit fat loss? He's in a fat loss phase, and he noticed that while using growth, it seems like weight and fat loss has stalled. Last week, he removed the growth, and he lost more. I mean, granted, you're going to lose more fluid quickly. I do think there is an element that when we add in an anabolic or we add in growth, that what happens with fat loss may not be reflective on the scale anymore, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it takes, I think, some experience to tell, is this fluid that I'm gaining from the growth or compound? And, you know, because I do think there is an amount to that. Is he feeling fuller now? You know,
Mm-hmm.
is he feeling fuller? Is he getting better pumps in the gym than before he started it? That'd be another sign that he's maybe holding some more water. But
Mm-hmm.
then, yeah, you pull that out and the scale comes back down. It's not necessarily fat loss, but I'll tell you what, anytime we add a compound in, you know, that's why using pictures is such a good tool to have in our arsenal. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just the scale. You know, sometimes the scale doesn't move at all. In fact, Scott, I remember back in my first contest prep ever, I didn't understand that, but thankfully I was working with a coach, and
Mm-hmm.
I stayed the same weight for like 9 weeks.
Mm.
And I was like, I was getting pretty shooken by the end of that. But thankfully, we had like this older brother, younger brother relationship where he kind of like mentally smacked me upside the head.
Right.
Tell me to just shut up. You're looking better. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
You know?
You go back 6 weeks and look at your picture, like, okay, yeah, I do look a lot better. The scale didn't change.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
kind of aside, more sciencey stuff, but and I can't recommend one per se. I've got one that's just crappy. It's a scale that I have that isn't the greatest scale. I bought it because you could record stuff it adds it to your phone. You can it's a BIA scale. No matter what, I've been literally at 4% on a DEXA, and I've been in the teens, and it always tells me I'm 30 to 33% body fat, no matter what. But one thing that this scale it won't do that, but other BIA scales that I've played around with, they're working in part on the premise, the underlying assumptions of the proprietary algorithms that are deep buried in there, is that you have more water in your fat-free mass than in your fat mass. So the hydration of the fat-free mass is higher.
Okay.
So changes in body water are reflected in the impedance, and then the calculator, they estimate what your body fat percentage is from that. So in his case, I don't have any, like I said, I don't even have a product to recommend to him, but a BIA scale would be an interesting way to go and look at what's going on there when that water comes in and out. Because what will happen is if he were to add the GH back in, and let's say he gains 3 or 4 pounds, or let's say he gains 5 pounds, it might show when he calculates his fat-free mass that he gained 8 pounds of fat-free mass.
Okay.
Even though, because he's got the extra water retention. And there was back in the day, back in the 90s, when I was in grad school and BIA skills were first being developed, they had one they were testing at one of the labs, Kurt Curitin's lab at University of Georgia. He did a lot of body comp stuff, and I was doing rebound dieting. Now, if anyone's old school, Nick's probably heard of that. But rebound dieting was just this insane program. It was so much fun to do. It was similar to Cybergenics.
Okay.
And it was like a 6-day-a-week program, and you would eat like nothing, because almost like a protein sparing modified fast, like Monday through Wednesday, and then Thursday you train, and then I was going from like 1,200 calories, 1,400 calories to like 7,000 calories on the rebound days.
Wow.
And I would gain 10 pounds over the course of 24 hours. And my body fat percentage would go down. It would register all of that as fat-free mass.
Wow.
So my body would go up and my body fat percentage would drop. And it was just from all the fluid in the water. And I was going to like all-you-can-eat buffets and just going down like everything I could just to get the calories in, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what week by week, I think I did it for like 8 weeks, something like that. And my 10-pound marker went up about a pound a week for those 8 weeks. I gained like 8 or 10 pounds over the course. So whatever, 191 to 201, and then 192 to 202, and 193 to 203, week in and week out. But it always showed in the BIA that water was fat-free mass, so that you would see a decrease in his body fat percentage if it's water retention on a bioelectrical impedance scale, which is just kind of cool. It would verify our hypothesis that it's water weight from the GH causing this weight to vary like that.
He did say that he's using calipers to measure body fat because he doesn't trust the accuracy of electrical impedance tests.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. It's not going to be you violate the assumptions when your hydration changes. You violate the assumptions of the algorithm. So then you don't. But But you can, if you're holding water, and some of it's the more body fat you have, the more body fat you once had, the looser the skin is, the more space you have for the water to go. So the water will be your train one where the fat once was. That's what I always say. So if you had a lot of body fat in your love handles or your glutes, and you just got rid of it, and even though your skin is thin, but it's still a little bit soft, it hasn't tightened up.
Yeah.
Especially if you're an older guy, you're going to hold water. If you hold water, it's going to go where the fat was. So if he's doing skin folds where his fatty areas are, the water is going to go to where those fatty areas are or were, and he's going to see it in the skin fold to some degree. So skin folds are going to be, I could go off on body comp if people want to hear about that. Maybe we should move the next. That's maybe.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We had one from Zhang Kim. He made a few comments.
Kim.
One of them was that he had turned pro with a really low doses, like 300 test, I think he said, and maybe like 25 Winstrol. I can't remember what it was, but it was one of the other comments that I didn't have favorited here because it wasn't a question. Well, he said, do you think that was a good thing? I say it's a great thing. You know what I mean? Like, the less the better. Now you have more options left versus the guys that you were competing with that were pulling out all the cards, and just to keep up with you, and you still beat them. So more power to you. But he said, question 2, do you prefer metformin or insulin in a carb up day during peak week?
Neither.
Yeah. You'd hear a lot of people who say we got to use insulin, drive those nutrients. So why do you say neither? Well, let me ask you that, because I agree with you in most all cases.
I don't. I've talked to lots of people about insulin before. I've had people come to me asking about insulin, and most of the time, and actually, I talked to Steve about this. We had a chat a couple weeks ago. I talked about why I'm so reticent in terms of talking about drugs with people. Is that I get the sense that folks don't quite understand what they're doing.
Okay.
In the way that I feel like I can give them information that I know 100%, 110% facetiously that I know they're going to be cool with it. And if the way I typically do peak week, and if someone's dieted down and their insulin sensitivity is already sky high, and you're carbing up, you really I don't know that you're going to need, if you fill and spill the way I typically do it, you're probably about as full as you're going to get.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if you need more insulin. Some people, the psychological effect, or the placebo effect may be there. If you're in a situation where, you've got to carb up super rapidly,
that's been a time where I've used it, like a guy who needed to make weight, and he had to make a lot of weight, like a heavy, hard cut. It could be harder to get him filled back out in a short duration of time, but we're still really cautious with it,
Yeah. The first thing I would say, like, let's say if he came to me when that was a question on a consultation,
right?
The first thing I would say is, how many peak weeks have you done without insulin?
Okay.
Right. I mean, 10, 12, 14. Yeah. I've probably done 300 myself personally, so many times, practice with it. And so do you have like a baseline to say, okay, I'm doing my carb up if I time it, because the week of the show, I'm not going to lose. It's not like if I have a day of carbing up, I've lost a whole day of dropping fat. Oh my gosh, I didn't get as lean as I could have. You should give yourself ideally plenty of time, unless you got a weight class issue to deal with, where you can just get full as a house. We're talking like a lot of times my weight when I would fill and spill, I would go from like 215 to 229, 230 over the course of the carb up. And then I drop the water and I come back down, I'd be like 213, 212. So a lot of glycogen stored in that process. I can't imagine that insulin could have given me any more from that. But that would be how he could know whether either of those drugs would make any differences. He's tried, I don't know the situation, so maybe it's a weight class issue, but he's tried different approaches to say, okay, maybe he tries like a highly branched cyclic dextrin. If he's got a limited time, he has it on hand. He weighs in. First thing he does, he takes in 200 grams of highly branched cyclic dextrin. He's got to go overnight, and he puts in 800 grams of that. Let's say with enough fiber to not get the shits. And he's practiced that, and he's done it 10 or 12 times, and he still doesn't feel like he's filling out.
Yeah.
Like, okay, Then he's got a good baseline. Then he could see maybe I add something else to help with that. So as far as the two contributing to glycogen storage, if I had to pick one or the other, insulin can be the one that's going to do that much more reliably than glucophage.
I would be afraid 100%. With metformin that we would end up flat. I've seen people end up on the flatter side more than the filled out side. There are exceptions. I've worked with one guy who tells me that metformin makes him feel really full in the gym, but he's a rare one for me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the situation where you're carbing up, you could take, if you took metformin, it could work against you, but you've got plenty of carbs there. So that's a little different than when someone's using metformin on a regular basis in their normal day-to-day diet, and they see, like many people, that it makes them flat. If they take it while they're one thing that like alpha lipoic acid is something I've played around with a lot, and I found that seems to help with glycogen storage and reduce water retention to some degree. So if you're someone who's trying to load and make sure you have plenty of water to load appropriately, alpha lipoic acid, and this is from my days of cyclical ketogenic diets where I would, 5-6 days of CKD of ketogenic dieting and then a day of carb up. And it'd be like the same thing, like literally carb up every week, Sunday, same foods, whatever, and then compare 200 milligrams of alpha lipoic acid with each meal, or 400 versus none, and what I looked like the next day. Yeah. And with the alpha lipoic acid, it would help with less water retention, with everything else being the same. That's the only way really to know, because, and the thing is too, there might be, maybe he doesn't have, maybe he's down at his weight limit, or maybe it doesn't matter now. And then 2 years from now, he can barely get down to the weight limit, or maybe he goes up. So who knows, where he's at there and what division he competes in. But the peak week strategies vary show to show, depending on where you're at, in your practice run.
Absolutely.
So you got to have all those other, in my opinion, you got to have all those variables sort of set in place, and then you can see what one of those two would work better for him.
All right. I had a couple more questions here. We probably have enough time for. I did want to put this one up. What, can you read that one for me? Because I can't read the second half of that sentence.
Oh,
he says, Scott, you're a legend.
Legende. Liebe dein Fortitude-Training-Buch. Es ist großartig. Grüße aus Wien. Hätte eine Frage. He's got a question.
He's got a question.
Great.
Okay.
Greetings from Vienna.
Okay.
Got a question.
Let's see here. He says, do you need to cycle off insulin used only on training days, 15 to 20 units total pre and post, or can it be used indefinitely like growth, provided sensitivity stays okay? Tested HbA1c and blood glucose post meals in the morning.
Need to. Those are he's measuring the right things. Only using it, depends on how many days he's training a week, 3 or 4 times a week like that. And everything's kind of staying the same as his measure of insulin sensitivity. The thing that he didn't mention, he's doing blood glucose post meals and in the morning. You can also do a HOMA insulin sensitivity index where you measure blood glucose and insulin in the fasted state. There's calculators online. You just multiply those two things together, and you get this HOMA index, homeostatic measurement assessment index, and then you can see what your insulin sensitivity is, because it could be that his blood glucose, let's say in the morning, is staying relatively the same, but he's losing insulin sensitivity because it requires more basal insulin output to maintain his glucose at that point. So that would suggest that he's less sensitive. His body's producing more. It's still regulating really well. Yeah. It hasn't gotten, out of whack, and he's started to have hyperglycemia, resting hypoglycemia. So measure that, and then, you can, I don't think it's too expensive to measure. It's like $40, I think.
Yeah, at least here.
Direct Labs. Yeah.
All right, so time for a couple more here. We had one about carb cycling I wanted to get to. Well, I'll bring up another insulin one. Questions for the squats. You said, I've had my fasting glucose come up at about 115 the last couple times I've done a blood test. HbA1c comes back in the middle reference range. Could berberine help with this?
Yeah. I mean, if he's wanting to take like berberine to bring his glucose down before the test, it's not like you can just have a good test and then everything's good. I would
Yeah.
be wondering why he's got a higher fasted blood glucose. So it could be, I mean, I don't like being, fasted for blood work. Sometimes it's hard to get in the morning, when you do blood work. So you've got to come in there at like noon sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes people eat a giant meal. He might not have been totally post-absorptive. So I would consider that. If he's drinking, sometimes they say it's okay to drink coffee before you go in for your fasted because there's just minimal calories in there. That will elevate your blood glucose sometimes.
Let me say something really quick. Chris, yes, email me now, mcnallydiets@gmail.com. I'll get those pictures up. Okay.
So, yeah, I would look to why any other extraneous factors that might be contributing to why he's got elevated resting blood glucose with those tests. Because the HbA1c seems like it's good, but the 115 is quote unquote pre-diabetic. So, you get excited, you get riled up, maybe he's dieting down or whatever. He's taking fat burners and you've got caffeine in there and it's elevating his blood glucose a little bit. So I would maybe he's going to chime back in.
Oh, got a super chat too. So I guess we got to answer that one as well.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you very much.
I thought that was a bot.
No,
okay.
Thank you. He says, do bodybuilders get lasering done for body hair, or do they just shave and trim every few days? First of all, thank you for the super chat. I know a lot of women that do laser, like on their face and stuff. And from what I've seen is it's not a permanent answer, that it's something that like, especially if you're still using androgens, that like you are going to continue growing hair. So you might be able to thin it out. You might be able to get it under control. But for most people, they just shave, Have you done anything different, Scott?
No, I mean, I know, I'm not going to say anybody's name, but I know some people who tried it. Actually, many people who tried it, and like highly variable results as to whether it worked. You have to have the right skin color so that the laser, I think, because it's somewhat automated, it has to be able to, zap the hair follicle, and it can't do it that well if the colors. If you got a darker skin with darker hair, doesn't work, and sometimes they'll grow back.
Yeah,
I tried waxing a couple times.
Oh God!
Absolute disaster. Absolute
Did you
disaster.
bleed?
I was bleeding and just totally broken out. Like, I mean,
yeah.
It looked like I'd bathed in poison ivy or something. It was just nasty.
Dude, I just literally, like, I had some hair on my arms, and I was like, I just went like this, and now I got a spot right there from an ingrown hair, which I never have like spots right here, but I literally just was like, oh, I'm just gonna go zip. And boom, look at that, a couple days later. And it's everybody is different. I remember like Guy Cisternino, I think it was, and this was years ago. I think it was Guy. He had said that on his forearms, he would never shave with a razor. He would shave with clippers so that the hair didn't go under the skin. And I found that's the same for me. If I shave my forearms with a razor, they look so nasty and crazy with veins for the first few days. It's awesome. But then a week later, it's just all sorts of ingrown hairs all over on me.
Yeah.
Part of it is conditioning too. Like I used to get bad ingrown hairs on my chest, but then I got used to it over time. I never get that anymore.
Yeah. I think some of it's the direction that you shave too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause if you shave like against the grain of the hair, that you pull the hair up, and then you cut it, right? I'm trying to do this visually. You cut it, and then and then it goes back down. So like here's the level, and you go like this. You raise it up, you cut it, it gets cut there, and then that hair then ends up below the level of the skin. This is the way this is total armchair dermatology, cosmetology thing. But I always sense if you go that direction, it happens on your face too.
Yeah.
Then you end up with the clipped hair that's literally under the line of the skin. So that's going to be an ingrown hair, pretty easily.
Yeah.
But it depends on. There's so many. I've tried so many different. I just really don't shave very often. I just
I did more when I was competing, and here's the thing: when you're competing, I would figure out what you need to do well in advance.
Yeah.
You don't want to be figuring that out in the last week. So have a program down. I found, and I think the quality of razor makes a difference too. So
absolutely.
a really good razor. What are we using now? There's that new brand. It has the Harry's razors.
Okay.
Harry's razors. And it's interesting because UC Suma works for like the parent company of Gillette. And he said that like, because we used to all use like the Gillette Mach 5 or Mach 3, whatever, years ago. And now these new Harry's razors last longer. This isn't a commercial, by the way. Use code THINK for Harry's razors, Dollar Shave Club, whatever. But the razor quality has improved. And he said Gillette hasn't really kept up with the market. So I like Harry's. They last forever. And what else was I going to say?
That's the club. Like they just send you like
no, that's a different
basis?
one. Harry's is available at the grocery store. And also, so UC Suma also had a tip. He said your razor doesn't get dull from the hair shaving it. He said it gets dull from oxidizing from the H2O, from the water, being exposed to water and then drying. So you want to make sure when you're done shaving to shake your razor out, get all the hair out of it so it doesn't remain wet on the razor, and then store it dry, and that's how it's going to last its longest.
You gotta buy a hairdryer so I can dry my razor off after I.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I still do use. Maybe I'm just old school. I'm caveman, but I still use like the Mach 5s, the Gillettes.
Right. Yeah.
But I have the electric one that buzzes.
Yeah.
And that's a world of difference. That like makes it 50% better.
Yeah.
I have a big one that I found somewhere. They have some smaller ones that look about the same size as the regular razors that you can have a single, like it runs on a single AAA. And I have a big one. Like, it's fairly, it could be mistaken for like a female sex toy probably. It's that big. You can put like 2 AA's in there and the thing works great. It's awesome.
Yeah. I used to have one it was like it had an arm on it, so you could like crank the arm out and get your back.
Oh yeah, I have one of those.
That's the hard part, man, is trying to get your own back.
I'm so good with that, man. Like I'm an expert at that. I went like, this is what I did this like I think I put this in my book, but like I've actually traveled to shows with everything I needed for the entire show in a carry-on, including all my own color, and did my own color on my back.
You're kidding
all
me.
Completely by myself. Yeah. I've done that a few times just for the challenge to see if I could do it. Yeah. Shaved my own back, use a back scrubber with a pad on it and the Protean and patted that on, using a mirror and looking behind my back.
Yeah.
So it all can be done. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Man, I was checking because Chris told us that he was sending us some pictures of his gym, and he said email is on the way, and I'm checking my junk mail. Oh, there it is. So Chris said he was late to join us because he was putting his home gym together. Let's check this out together. Cool. Let's see what he's got. We got a bunch of pictures here. So here's the first one. Whoa.
Nice. Looks slick.
He's got more pictures here. So what does he have there? That's a rack, and it looks like he has what do you call that, Scott? The powerlifting for squat thing. It's the name's eluding me right now. Monolift. Yeah, he's got those monolift hooks on there.
Oh yeah. I see. I don't think it's a monolift per se, but but he can adjust that down. Looks like those are pulleys on the end of that too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. The hooks there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Those are monolith style hooks. You're right.
He's got some nice looking dumbbells there too.
Yeah.
Let's see what else he's got here. He's got
beautiful.
Bunch more pictures. Oh wow! So this is man, look at this. I thought it was a garage too, but we had whoa.
This is like a studio. Oh, this is a professional gym or fitness training studio where he trains people.
Yeah, it looks like a studio here. It's got all sorts of bars in the background there, up near the pole. He said he's just putting this together right now.
Oh man, that's so much fun.
He said he started working at 8 a.m. until around 6 p.m. now. So he's been at this all day. Obviously not in the U.S.
Yeah, right.
Here's another slight angle of part that we already kind of saw.
It's so fun to put stuff together.
It really is, isn't it, man? He had to have had a blast here today. What is that machine up against the pole, Scott?
Up against the support there to the left?
Yeah.
I think actually that is a knee extension hamstring curl combo. It's hard to say that. I think Patrick Teutsch actually has a training video. He trains legs at home, like in his basement or something, I think.
Okay.
And he has one of those, and it's a plate loaded. I think that's what it is. You can see it's
Here's
got
another angle
on
of
the
it. There's another angle of it. Let's see.
on the
here.
cam there.
Yeah.
I think on the cam. Yeah. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's got
Yep.
all the holes in there. So he takes that post is all the way underneath there. That's basically in knee extension position, and he can pull the pin out and swing that thing. Yep, leg extension curl combo.
Yep. There we go.
That's a European thing that Patrick Teutsch has in his, and they look awesome.
I've never used one of those before.
It's a seated hamstring curl. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
got
one.
that hack. It looks like a hack leg press combo over there too.
That's what I want to get from my barn.
I could see with that. It's a body solid too. They make good equipment.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I know that exact model.
Yeah,
that's exactly what kind of the setup I want to have in my barn. I'm just using my Power Rack and my Iron Master, but those are the two machines I wanted to get for sure.
I see some heating, cooling up there. Thank God he's got some air conditioning for that. So he said this was his mom's flower shop, and she retired.
Oh, okay.
So he's making some good use out of it.
Man, that's growing cool. Flowers, he's growing muscles.
You're right. Yeah. That's cool, man. Good for him.
That's sweet.
I was going to bring up.
Can we give him a plug? What's the name of your?
I think it's.
place,
I don't think he has it. I think it's just his personal gym.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you tell us, and I'm going to pull up one more question too. And shout out to everybody who's been hanging with us. Crohn's Lifter. Thanks, Sean. Yep, hit the like button. We appreciate that. Everybody who's watching right now, we have 43 likes. I could definitely use your help just simply by hitting the like button. It really does make a difference. I'm going to see if I can pull up one more because I liked this question just talking about a sample of a carb cycling diet and how it would be done. He says he understands the theory, but he's curious about the actual application. Can I tell you the way I would start a carb cycle, Scott?
Yeah, go for it.
So let's say that I start working with a guy and he's using, I'm just to make it simple, let's say he's got 5 meals, okay? And the first meal is oats, half cup of oats, we'll just say, and the rest of the diet, let's say he uses 3/4 cup of oats in meal 1, and then meal 2 he trains, or then he trains, and then meal 2 through 5 is all 1 cup of rice with protein. And now he's been making progress with this diet. Let's say he's down 10 pounds, and for whatever reason we decide we're going to carb cycle. I would use that as the high day. That would now become my high day, and then I would remove some matter of carbs to create a low day, and it might only be 25%. Maybe my low day is 3/4 of a cup of rice. Maybe I don't know, and maybe I would say, okay, let's do 2 low days and 1 high day, and boom, you're on a carb cycle. I'd start it that simple. It depend on the individual, of course, until like what we were going to do with it, but that's literally how I would start a carb cycle. And beyond that, and I do feel like in Skip and Andrew and I talked about this recently, there is something about the cyclical approach to dieting that works better than just a consistent same calories every day. Why is that?
Well, there's 2 things that are sort of interesting. I don't know if I ever talked about this before on the podcast, but I like to use sort of a nutrient timing approach, which is, a toggling approach to carbohydrate intake based on what's going on in the body at that time. So, like
if you're training,
training that day, or training or non-training, I keep it really simple with most people: training or non-training days. There's also approach where people would carb cycle, and the relative amount of carbs would vary depending on what muscle groups they're training. So you can have the carbs that match the relative muscle mass that's involved with the caloric expenditure, the exertion level of the exercise. So more on leg days, you don't need a high carb day if you're training forearms and calves and doing abs, right? Yeah. And then so you might have 3 days that vary. You could do, like, let's say you do a push-pull legs. You could do push and pull being high days, legs being and pull being high days, maybe push being a medium day and your non-training day being a low day.
Yeah, absolutely.
That way. And then some people, makes me want to call it, it's like the Weider muscle confusion principle applied to diet, right? Where you have a push-pull legs, you have a training split, and then you have carb cycling that doesn't match the training split, right? To some degree. So you might have like high, medium, low, and your training is push, pull, off, legs, off, push, pull. And so you basically have some high days where legs might coincide with high day, and then legs might coincide with medium day, and then legs might coincide with low day.
Yeah.
And you mix it around that way. And there is something, maybe there's something going on there in terms of it does create novelty of stimulus. If you train, let's say legs with low carbs, there's to some degree when you're providing carbohydrate, you're limiting some aspects of the stimulus. You're not using as much fat, for instance. So this is the idea from like the most extreme example, obvious one is like endurance training, where people for a long time they tried to sort of fat adapt so that they could develop a better ability to train with more fat in the system. So increase the enzymes of beta oxidation. So then when they have carbohydrate, which is necessary for maximal performance in endurance exercise, you've got now better fat oxidation capabilities on top of better carbohydrate coming in from the diet. So you would have, that would be the idea. It doesn't really pan out that way. That's the thing. Because what would happen to people, same with like trying to train at altitude, is when you're training with low carbs, you don't do as well with endurance. You just can't train as hard. So you lose your training adaptation. You become somewhat detrained.
Okay.
So you're less fit. You may end up being better able to oxidize fat, and you may get more carbs in there, which is going to have an ergogenic effect. But now your fitness level has gone down. So you shot yourself in the foot. You're taking one step backwards and one step forwards, and you're at the same place or worse. So, but I think psychologically, sometimes it can make sense because if you're changing things up and you have some novelty there, it keeps it a little bit it's a little bit variable, and you got a high day coming in, a medium day, and a low day, and it's not like every leg day is going to just be excruciating, and every because you're low carb, and then you're getting tons of carbs on your chest days. As long as you're not just completely shooting yourself in the foot as far as training by having your carbs so low on those days or the day before that you can't train well, it can be something to sort of look forward to. This is why it's interesting, like back to cyclical ketogenic diets, like people and just training in general, we live on a 7-day work week, right? Our bodies are, our circadian rhythm is, set up around 24-hour. That's the way the sun, the moon works. We got lunar cycles as well with the menstrual cycle, for instance. And our normal circadian rhythm actually runs a little bit longer than 24 hours, but light resets it every day. So that's pretty normal. But the 7-day work week is something that we set our training cycles up to. And they don't necessarily have to be that way. Right?
It's hard. It could be confusing if you've always done it and then you switch. But I'm with you. Yeah.
You don't have to. But like when people are doing cyclical ketogenic diets, it's like, okay, no carbs on Monday, I'm good. Tuesday, I'm good. Okay, I know I'm going to carb up on Saturday. I can make it.
Yeah.
So it's just like having, that that's there, right? So if you're cycling through the low and the high carb days, if you add in these medium and low carb days, if you know you got a high carb day coming, it can be one way as a coach, I think, or it's harder to trick yourself, but you can sort of set things up so you're going to get those high carb days in there. And it's a way to sneak in. It's like, I just had a high carb day on back training, and this time it ended up being a medium day. I can make it because next time it's going to be a high carb day. I can do that. So what you did then is you didn't just try to train back with all medium days, is you slipped in some medium low carb days. So you drop calories down on that day in a way that you can kind of handle psychologically because a big day's coming.
Right.
And you're going to get those carbs in there eventually anyway. I think there might be something, the nutrient timing approach, that's a different idea. But so having that, mixing it up a little bit, I think has it can, for some people, they like the complexity. This is back to peak week. This is something that I do sometimes with people who stress out during peak week, and I just give them a peak week protocol so they have something to focus on. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like today's diet, what's today's diet can be? Oh, today's going to be a rough one. It's a low carb day, but tomorrow's going to be a high carb day. I know that. So I set up my low carb day, and I got these meals at night, blah, blah, blah. So you have to something to pay attention to, as opposed to, oh shit, it's going to be chicken and rice with no rice in the last 3 meals every day, through, and I'm just going to, every day at 8:00, it's going to suck because I'm going to be starving and I can't fall asleep.
Yeah.
You have something that's kind of distracting you, putting your mind elsewhere, away from quote unquote the suck of the diet. So adding that complexity is a little bit like adding in variety in your exercises and your training regimes. Like, I get to do something different. I'm still going to train until I'm bleeding from my eyes, but I'm not going to have to go and do it with barbell back squats every time. I'm going to do the hammer squat. I'm going to do a hack squat. I'm going to do whatever. And that variety adds some spice to our psychological life, and carb rotating in that way, even though it might not fit exactly with what you want recovery wise. You should be smart about it. If legs always dwindle, and you just pick kind of a random carb cycle, and you end up having like medium and low days, like 1 out of 3 days on your leg days, and that's not what you really should have. Your leg day should always be a high day. And maybe set your cycling up a little bit differently. But that sort of mixing up like that, I think it gives people something to look forward to, and it does add a little bit of an interesting scenario, because you do change the stress. As an example I gave with the endurance training and the fat adaptation, you do change the stress that's imposed by the exercise stimulus based on the nutrient environment in which it occurs. Just say it that way.
I can see that. I'm reliving my contest preps listening to you talk about this right now.
Yeah, I mean, like doing cardio on fasted. People swear by that. It's an analogous thing, actually. You wake up in the morning, you start your day off right. You do your cardio, you're on track. You're not going to fuck it up. Like, I'm already off to a good running start. Like, I'm not going to cheat after I just woke up, did fasted cardio. I'm already grinding, baby. I'm hashtagging. I'm kicking ass. I'm ready to rock and roll. That's the psychological impact. But maybe there's also, this is my sort of thought, is that you do, because you're training without carbohydrates and insulin, your system is shifting your fuel usage, and it's making the skeletal muscle cells that are being trained fat adapted, because they largely have just fat available, or they're going to use more fat without a doubt in a fasted situation. So maybe that trains your body to be better at oxidizing fat. That's the physiological mechanism that I've always thought is one that might explain why people seem to lose. Some people think they lose fat better when they diet and do fasted cardio as opposed to fed cardio. So anyway, it's a way to slip in more low carb days and create a caloric deficit by doing that rotation. And you always know you got a big carb day coming. So it's like, it's not so bad, as opposed to, I got to suffer for 6 days before I get a big carb day, Yeah.
I would say that literally every person that I work with for fat loss has some sort of cycle. And even then, anybody I work with for muscle growth, we have some fashion of a cycle. It's not ever the same, every single day. We don't start out that way. A lot of times people will say, what are we going to do? A carb cycle? How's that going to look? And I would start somebody out on a consistent diet and get them to a point where we could make progress with that consistent diet. And then down the road, then we figure out, well, what are we going to do different? Because the first question I usually get, and honestly, I'll keep people's food even the same on their non-training days, Scott, like the first week. And I say, well, let's see what we get first. I can't tell, basically let's watch what your body does, and then we can adjust from there. Because for all I know, we're going to need even more food, We're about out of time, though.
Put the training wheels on. Make sure they can diet.
Yeah.
Stick to the diet before you make it all complex. Yeah. That may not suit them at all. Maybe they have to know exactly what they're doing. Otherwise, they just it's too much.
We appreciate you tuning in, hanging out with us. Scott, you're available for consultations if people wanted to do any kind of deep dive on any of this stuff, right?
Yep.
How do they reach out to you for that?
I've got my emails on my website, drscottstevenson.com. You look at the Hire Scott tab, and you can click. I just need good formulated questions, and we can dig in.
Hell yeah.
I love those. I love doing consultations. When we got a directed, I get a lot of questions, and people aren't quite sure what they want. So that's kind of the first step, is just to sort of have, a lot of the questions we get here are great, to be honest. Simple as that. So if you got good questions and you're like, I can't figure this out on my own, I'd like to chat with Scott about it, then I'm here.
Check out byobbcoach.com. You can get Scott's book from there, or you can go to Amazon for Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. Get the hardcover. I wanted to give a shout out to our advertiser, True Nutrition, and I wanted to tell you guys that there are a lot of basically intra-workout carb powders out there nowadays that claim to have highly branched cyclic dextrin in them. But if you flip the bottle over, they might have a limited amount. Like I've seen a lot of products that have, say, 15 grams of a cluster dextrin or highly branched cyclic dextrin, same thing. And then the rest of it is a proprietary blend. And they're just not telling you that it's basically sugar. Here's the deal is that highly branched cyclic dextrin is extremely expensive. And there's not a good profit margin on it, so it's hard to make money on. But the best bet is honestly going through True Nutrition. You could get it flavored, you could get it unflavored and mix Mio into it to flavor it yourself. And you're going to get like literally the best price that you can on 100% pure, highly branched cyclic dextrin. And if you wanted to add dextrose to that on top of it, you could do that, but you're not basically paying for highly branched cyclic dextrin and only getting 15 grams per serving. You're getting the full 25 grams per scoop. So that's my first thought. But most important for us is to use our code THINK, because without that, they literally don't care that you heard about, them through us or whatever. Literally the code, the only thing it does is it lets them know that their advertising dollars are of value. We advertise them because I truly believe in them. I used True Nutrition through literally all of my contest preps or products that I used long before they ever were part of our shows. So enough of my spiel there. Like I said, use our code THINK over there, and supplementsource.ca for our Canadians, so that you guys can take part in celebrating our shows too, and taking part in helping to support us. We don't have a code over there or anything, but you can literally get like half off deals on products that are like short dated or label changes and stuff. And of course, thank you to our Patreons. You guys are a big part of what's making this thing happen. So thank you very much. I've got a question thread over there for all the shows. So, and I've been posting a lot of little odds and ends and random stuff at Patreon too. So if you're part of Patreon, be sure to check it out over there. And Scott, as always, man, it's a pleasure hanging out with you, brother.
Yes, indeed. Every time.
All right, guys, we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody, for watching on the live stream. And if you haven't hit the like button, please do, because it'll help other people to find this after it's been published. See you guys.